I'm going to do just a short series of questions. We're going to have representatives from the boards of all three of the organizing organizations. And so we're going to have Fredrik Versal, who is the chair of the Institute Motor, and Gary Baker, vice chair of AmCham Sweden, and Ola Andrén, chair of Transparency International Sweden. So if you guys can come up, I think we'll just use the hand mics, and I'll ask a question in English, and you guys respond in Swedish, and I'll hand you the mic. So I think, Fredrik, we'll start with you. Globally, we're experiencing a lot of instability politically, and and I think in the U.S. last week, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned a conviction of the former governor of Virginia, a guy named Robert McDonnell, who was convicted of, I think, 11 counts of bribery, and the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, overturned that conviction, and significantly narrowing the scope for what it means to prosecute somebody for public corruption. So I think this has only sort of highlighted the fact that there's some instability in leadership if the state of a state as big as Virginia in the U.S., if the leader of that state can't be successfully prosecuted for accepting, I think, up to $200,000 in gifts, it creates some instability, at least distrust among voters. But this instability is broader than just there. I mean, it's the leadership in a lot of different countries. So what does the absence of strong leadership mean in terms of our collective efforts to fight corruption, or in the political context at both the Swedish, EU, and international levels? What do you think is required to actively prevent corruption?
Ja, det var en liten fråga. Först vill jag gratulera arrangörerna av det här seminarierna idag. Det har varit mycket, mycket värdefullt, tycker jag. Och konstruktivt och intressant. Och den här diskussionen, precis som du säger, så sker ju den i en relief av politisk oro. Inte bara det du nämner kring olika korruptionsfall, utan vi ser strömningar av populistiska, nationalistiska rörelser och isolationistiska rörelser. Och det här sätter ledarskapet på prov. Det är ingen tvekan om det. Och jag tror man kan säga, och det belyser den här diskussionen idag, att Sverige har en stor konkurrensfördel genom stabil demokrati, stabil förvaltning, men också ett näringsliv som är genuint intresserad av självreglering, att själv ställa sig i täten för ett etiskt ledarskap. Och jag tror att är det någonting som inte minst dagens diskussion och tidigare diskussioner om korruption kan leda till, så är det slutsatsen att arbetet börjar i toppen. Att det är det etiska oavsett vad man gör i övrigt, så är det etiska ledarskapet som sätter mönstret. Och det genuina intresset som finns kring till exempel näringslivskoden. Vi hörde den överenskommelse som har skett i byggbranschen. Vi hörde det genuina intresse som finns inom idrottsrörelsen. Att själva ta itu med problemen och inte bara lita på att någon annan fixar det. Det tror jag faktiskt är rätt uppmuntrande. Och här tror jag att Sverige ligger hyggligt väl till faktiskt.
Thank you. And if you could just give a quick tip or two for how companies and organizations who want to get involved in the Tillsammans mot corruption initiative or take stronger measures to combat corruption within their own organizations, what would you recommend?
Ja, det enkla svaret som ordförande för Institutet mot mutor, det är ju att man ska ta till sig näringslivskoden och leva efter den. Och den är listigt utformad på det sättet, och man ser det också i belysning av hur mutlagstiftningen är konstruerad, att den innebär normgivning i sig, alltså otillbörlighetsrekvisit och annat som man kan finnas i lagstiftningen påverkas av näringslivets egna bedömningar av vad som är otillbörligt eller inte. Då får man en dynamisk effekt i regelgivningen. Så jag tror att ett riktigt genuint intresse från näringslivet att skapa gemensamma normer som är väl förankrad i ledarskapet och i näringslivets ledning. Det tror jag på.
Thank you. So some peer pressure. So I think we'll just go in order that you guys are standing. So Ulla, one of the things that that we discussed earlier is how important it is to strengthen the position of whistleblowers, and I think it's a good question following the last session. But so, what in your opinion, how important is it to strengthen their position both in Sweden and generally?
Ja, det är naturligtvis oerhört viktigt, och jag är inte fullt så positiv som Fredrik här då, att det bara gäller ledarskapet, för makt korrumperar ju faktiskt, så att det krävs lite civilkurage från folk på golvet i industri, företag, på myndigheter och så vidare, att blåsa i pipan. För att det är ju så att alla stora korruptionshistorier som har uppdagats, det har ju faktiskt kommit inifrån organisationerna. Jag tänker på Ingvar Bratt på Bofors och Karin Törnqvist, Göteborgs Energi, Anders Kompass nu senast. De får mycket problem inom sina respektive organisationer när de låser i visslan. Det krävs mycket civilkurage för att göra detta, och det måste vi uppmuntra. Jag menar inte nödvändigtvis att man ska ha penningbelöningar för att bli visselblåsare, men ändå att samhället i stort värderar deras insatser och står upp för det och säger att det här är viktigt, ni har gjort någonting bra. Och det är ju inte så lätt när det blir sådana repressalier som det ofta blir från organisationerna. Så därför är det viktigt med den här lilla försiktiga visselblåsarlagen som kommer nu i 1 januari. Men vi måste jobba mycket mer med de här frågorna för att få ett samhällsklimat där det blir accepterat och till och med en god gärning att blåsa i visslan.
Thank you. So it's also sort of another, I mean, civil courage could be, I guess it's a requirement for standing up in those situations, because, I mean, it's a kind of a lose-lose situation unless the rest of society has your back. So whistleblowers are heroes, and we should do maybe a better job of supporting them. But in your opinion, how important is the principle of transparency itself, or sunshine, as we would say in the U.S., in terms of having the long-term effort to eradicate corruption?
Det hörs ju på namnet på vår organisation, Transparency International. Det är extremt viktigt, för utan öppenhet och insyn så vet man ju faktiskt inte vad som försiggår, så att det är ju grundläggande. Och vi har ju då en press, grävande journalister som är oerhört viktiga för att plocka fram sanningen. Tyvärr så gör de ju det oftare än våra tillsynsmyndigheter många gånger. Så det är A och O, för utan insyn och öppenhet så kan man ju inte veta vad som försiggår, och man kan inte ha något ansvarsutkrävande. Så det är centralt.
Thank you. So yeah, I think it's the example that Stuart said earlier with IBM's technology is the little window. I mean, if you don't have some transparency, you don't get the full picture. So that's important. Thank you. So Gary, over to you. Can you describe, like, from why AmCham is involved in tillsammans mot corruption?
Jag utgår i att ni förstår Peters frågor på engelska, eller hur? Då ska jag fortsätta på engelska. So you can either strain yourself to understand my Swedish or strain yourself to understand my English. AmCham, together with Institute mot Mutor and Transparency, started 4 years ago here at Almedal, and coming out of that then has continued to build this process. And I think for us Americans who grew up in the wake of the FCPA, especially those of us that have worked in the corporate sector, this is just part of our ryggrad. This is just part of something that we grew up with in all the training we've had in companies, all the reward and punishment systems. We all grew up with greatest respect for Department of Justice and IRS and SEC and all the agencies that we're starting to hear more in discussion of. So for AmCham and for our board, I mean, this is a real priority for us to continue to push tillsammans mot korruption as part of our brand here in Sweden. We think that there's a lot that can be learned. It's a never-ending process as well. So,
Thank you. And now for the tougher question, is there a common thread or themes that you've noticed throughout the day that maybe highlight some of the different approaches that in the fight against corruption between the United States and Sweden?
I've sat through almost all the sessions today, and I think I started today reflecting on what the differences might be, and the one word that came to mind for me was culture. The differences between Sweden and the U.S. And I've just kind of highlighted some things that were said through the day that reflected those differences in culture, starting with trust. Because here in Sweden, you've grown up with a much higher trust factor for each other and much more greater solidarity than what we've grown up with in the U.S. So that I think it's harder for you to question other people or to take those hard discussions that might be required as part of this discussion around corruption. As part of the gentleman from Unibet brought up his example where he was being asked about, what's the source of your funds, and the person asking it was like, I'm really sorry I have to ask this question, but I have to ask this question. So I mean, there's this discomfort, I think, that exists here in terms of maybe having to ask these more difficult questions of other people. The other one is perception. This is something that we've grown up with a lot in the U.S. is the concept of perception, that you have to always be mindful of how others might perceive your behavior. And I know transparency, your perception index, but we can't forget that one's perception is a function of their culture. And so my perception as an American may be very different than a Swede's perception in terms of, accepting a dinner by a customer, things of that sort. That's still very common practice in the U.S., things of that sort. The other is zero tolerance. I asked a question at one of the groups about how do you define zero tolerance. In the U.S., at least my recollection, I've been here in Sweden now 17 years, but my recollection is that when we speak of zero tolerance, it means that if you cross that line, you're out of a job. And which is to say that discussion around zero tolerance is very often reserved for really grave instances of somebody going over the line. Whereas the answer that we heard today, a similar answer I heard a few years ago when I asked 70 managers at Myndigheter för samhällsberedskap was, their answer was, we don't really know what it means. The answer that I got today was that we have zero tolerance for certain things, but it depends on what it is in terms of how grave the result might be. And then the last one, and a point that was brought up in the session from our friends that were talking about the differences in the work in the U.S., and that is, in the U.S., the government regulators have really encouraged an air of collaboration and cooperation by the companies. And it's so critical to stress that, because my sense here in Sweden is that there's still this, companies do not want to reveal things because they're afraid they're going to get hammered, and they probably will. I also see this true in terms of how the samhälle, the society, interacts with the police force. Leif, you brought up this first line of defense, which is so true, is if you have these processes in place, if you work collaboratively with the regulators, they will work collaboratively with you, because in many cases they don't fully understand the business world, and they need to learn what's the reality of business as well, and they can only do that from collaborating with businesses that are willing to collaborate with them.
Thank you. And I think what you bring up in terms of trust and also the perception differences, it's also true maybe even in professions, because as a lawyer in the U.S., you might have a different perception than somebody from a different profession, and the culture of the firm might be different as well in terms of reporting corruption. But thank you all for coming up here and answering questions, and thank you all for participating and for the work that you do on a daily basis to create a more sustainable climate for business and society. Because I think there's, again, from going back to the IBM pyramid, from safety is is a fundamental thing for all of us to have enjoy happiness, and having a corruption-free world will make us all more secure. So thanks.